physically in the building, so he'll be here. So we'll get started with a presentation. But first, before we do that, we'll go around and have introductions. So let's start back in the corner.
Agustin Rodriguez with CRTPO then.
Candace Schroeder, planning.
Ed McKinney, Charlotte Transportation.
Ethan Smith, strategy advisor.
Mr. Gilroy?
Brent Gilroy, Southeast Charlotte.
Andy Mott, Cats.
Kelly Goforth, Cats.
Eric Severo, Sustain Charlotte.
John Hughes, Cats.
Michelle Nance, Central Anacog.
Jason Lawrence, Cats.
Jason Wager, Central Anacog.
Liz Babson, Charlotte Transportation.
John Lewis, Cat.
Greg Belanger, HNTV.
And Alexander, Charlotte Transportation.
Julie Eisel, Committee Chair.
Braxton Winston, committee member. Tyler Joba, city manager's office.
Great. With that, I asked Taiwo if he would start with the 2040 presentation, and we'll do that, and then dig into these other topics once Mr. Phipps gets here, and hopefully Councilmember Ajmira. I believe she's coming as well. So go ahead, Ty, if you want to get us started.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Good morning. So I'll just give you a few updates on where we are with regards to, I think you have this one sheet handout in front of you, or sheet in front of you. So it really lays out the comprehensive plan schedule and the fact that we are, it's at the very end of your packet. We are in that third circle where we are working on our preferred growth scenario. Last time we presented to Council, we walked through the 4 different growth scenarios, business as usual, which is today. And then we talked about the strong centers, the connected corridors, and also neighborhood nodes. So what we've been doing since then was really to put this online. And also we've been providing people with a booklet of the survey itself. So everyone can weigh in. As we indicated, not one scenario really fulfills the vision of the type of Charlotte we want, but each one of those scenarios, including the base case, has some advantage over the other. So we're giving the community an opportunity to weigh in and help us in terms of what should we be looking at as performance indicators for each one of these scenarios. So we met with the community. After we met with you on October 7, I believe, we also presented at 3 different community meetings on October 8 and 9. And we had one here at the Government Center. About 75 or so people came. The one we had at Commando Center had over 50 people. And the one we had at Kennedy Middle School had over 58 people. So we had almost 200 people at all those 3 meetings. So far, as at this weekend, we've had 465 people who completed the booklet itself. I don't know how many we have online. I will assume that last I heard last week, middle of last week, we were almost at 500 online. And that's not including the weekend participation. I think we had people at JCSU homecoming event participated. I presented at Junior League of Charlotte this weekend, and they also completed some surveys. We've also had Biketoberfest. So we actually had quite a lot of events this weekend where people participated. But my ask of you is that you share this information with those in your network. I did email this to you as well in terms of the link itself. If you could share those with those in your network and in your team so that they can also participate. The last date for completing the online and the booklet itself is October 31st. We'd like to have as many people participate as much as possible. Again, going back to that schedule, after this, we talk about preferred growth scenario based on what we're hearing from you and the community. We come back to you at that point. And then early next year, we're going to spend the bulk of the spring working on policy and strategy development as to how do we, what are those policies that we need to start developing in order for us to be able to carry the preferred growth scenario into implementation. So as we've done over the last several months, we continue to make this a standing item on every TAP committee meeting so we can update you on where we are, and then you can ask us questions as to what we're working on and what's next. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from committee? We skipped over to number 4, just to have the update on the comprehensive plan. Okay. Great, then why don't we go, you want to go in order?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
I guess
Okay.
one thing, I know you mentioned numbers. I'd just like us to try to keep track of, I know at the beginning we looked at kind of demographics.
yes.
So if we can kind of keep track of what demographics we are hitting or not hitting, and find maybe ways to get in front of the folks that we aren't hitting, if that is
Yeah.
in fact a case.
We are doing that. I actually have that here if you want. The breakdown of those 465 that completed the booklet, we've had African American participation at 28%, Hispanics at 6%. We feel that we're low on both of those, and we continue to look for opportunities to really up these percentages. We're low on low-income participation, with only 20% of people participated so far, and $50,000 or less. And
We can
We
take
can
that
take
off,
those, yeah,
offline,
yeah.
but I would say if, I don't know if you put that information in the email that you sent, but when I'm sharing, if I can
I
ask
have
my
that.
community
Okay.
exactly who we're looking to get in front of, sometimes that is more effective, so.
we'll get that breakdown to you.
Absolutely, thank you.
So, okay, yeah, thank you for that question. Well, for the rest of the agenda, we've got 3 items that are actually related. One way or the other, we have the regional transit study, which is really a partnership between the city, pretty much the Metropolitan Transit Commission, and Central Atlanta Council of Government. We have representatives here this morning. John Lewis will be leading that presentation, but we also have Michelle Nance, our Director of Planning from Central Atlanta Council of Government, in the room as well. So they will make that presentation about the regional transit study. That item is also on your agenda for Monday, for later today. But I just think that it would be good for you to hear that presentation and ask the questions that you have. And then after that, we'll kind of go to Silver Line.
Okay, great. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem Heisel, Councilmember Winston, and Phipps. I'm excited to be here this morning to talk to you about this regional transit plan that we hope to get going in November. I was fortunate enough to be involved in the 2025 Transit and Land Use Plan back in 1998, and if you remember, that was kind of a countywide transit plan for Mecklenburg County that included bus service improvements and enhancements and rapid transit. And I feel like this, to me, this is the stepping stone to this development of a regional transit plan, is the stepping stone to much greater conversations regionally and development together on implementation strategies on an overall regional transit plan. And we recognized Michelle Nance and Jason Wager, our partners from COG. Again, the purpose is just to share details about the plan with you. This item is on your agenda tonight for consideration, an agreement between CATS and the Central Atlanta Council of Governments. Again, the regional plan that we're talking about undertaking is 12 counties across 2 states. It includes the kind of the inner ring counties immediately around Mecklenburg County, which are the ex officio members of the MTC, and then we also go out further to take in counties beyond that, and we also have kind of the urban areas in South Carolina as well. So again, it's 12 counties, 2 states, about 2.7 million population living in that area, and again, it's upwards almost of 6,000 square miles. So the last couple of years, we've been out having conversations around the region. Several of us from CATS and the COG, and we've had a lot of good discussions where people talk about the needs in their community, and it's not just rapid transit, but it's basic mobility needs, whether it's getting to doctor's appointments or educational opportunities or getting to work. So we know there's a lot of mobility issues and needs across the region. People's travel does not really recognize political boundaries, so we have a lot of folks moving back and forth amongst all 12 counties in this region. So we want to undertake several different things as part of this study, looking at the local and local bus services with all the systems in the region that offer service, and how can we interconnect those? How can we have maybe common transit mobility hubs where transfers can take place, and again, folks can not be limited to just travel within their county, but how they can get across the entire region. We're also going to look at some of the rapid transit corridors that have been identified by some of the adjacent counties. As you know, we've gotten several resolutions from Cabarrus County and Union County and Gaston County about looking and studying rapid transit into those counties. So we're going to look at some of those that were identified in that manner, and then also some that were identified back during the Project Connect process back in 2015. Again, we want to look at things like the land use, talk with folks about land use that maybe needs to be in place to help promote future transit. And then, again, areas of coordination that I mentioned, the cross-county connections, look into things like a regional fare media, so folks can just, pay for whatever system they're traveling on with one device or one card, and, leave it to the transit agencies to kind of sort out how the fare is shared. Again, mobility hubs, maintenance facilities, opportunities for shared facilities, shared procurement opportunities, and then also scheduling, kind of one website or one call center that folks can contact to plan their trip across the region. We'll also look at transportation demand management strategies, and then also kind of new transportation technology, mobility as a service, autonomous vehicles. And the idea is that this study will lay out some clearly identified strategies and defined, roles and next steps, because this involves not just our MPO, but the surrounding MPOs. So there'll be a lot of activities that and a lot of actions that we'll want the surrounding MPOs to incorporate into their plans as well. Again, considerations for land use, regional coordination. Again, I mentioned those, funding strategies, and then kind of a collaborative process for how all the MPOs can take these items through their boards. This shows the funding that we've been able to line up to date. One clarification, the CR MPO, that's Cabarrus Rowan MPO, that's a typo. Their contribution is $100,000, not $125,000. But otherwise, we've been able to assemble about $1.7 million to date from the various funding partners. You can see NCDOT is a major contributor, CATS, funding coming through CARTPO as well. South Carolina DOT has committed some funds, as well as the MPO down in York County with the match. That's what that bottom 26,000 is. So, and then we've left open the ability or the potential to get other funding partners or funds in future fiscal years in the event we need to study additional things. We know there'll probably be a lot of meetings and engagement and everything, so we want to make sure we have that covered as well. This shows the general. Sure.
Just Mr. Phipps.
So you're saying that there's opportunity, we're hoping for opportunities for other partners to be able to fill this gap to get to 2 million, right?
Right, potentially. Okay. I mean, we're only going to do the amount of work that we have funding for, and we'll prioritize it in that manner. We hope to maybe get some more funds from NCDOT for transportation demand management. Also, some of the land use. The U.S. EDA, Economic Development Administration, COGS, have been having conversations with them about possibly funding some of the work with the land use and the economic development potential.
So is the Rock Hill, is that MPO, is that their contribution is this RFATS?
Yeah, and the South Carolina DOT.
Okay, but are they separate and apart from their MPO? I mean, are they included? Is that a part of their MPO, or this is just a separate?
Right, RFATS is the MPO.
Oh, okay. But it doesn't include Lancaster and Chester?
It includes parts of Lancaster, I believe, right? Yeah, Lancaster.
Lancaster is included in RFATS, yes.
Okay.
So we have, you can see, we have CARTPO, Gaston, Cleveland, Lincoln MPO, Cabarrus, Rowan, and RFAT. So we have, our MPO here in Charlotte, as well as the surrounding MPOs, all contributing to this regional effort.
John, is this the same presentation that'll be given to council tonight?
My understanding is there will be no presentation tonight.
Oh, okay.
It's just approving a contract, and for the very
Okay.
reason that a portion of these funds needs to be expended by June of 2020.
Okay, so then at some point in the very near future, could you give council members the breakdown of what RFATS is, of what, CARTPO, what's the other version of CARTPO for those counties that aren't? Because I think this stuff rolls off your tongues because you deal with it every day, but it's really confusing, especially to council members who aren't, it's confusing to me. And then you've got council members who really aren't hearing these terms very much. But, who they all are and how they fit into the picture, almost just a visual
Sure.
organizational chart, if you will, on what with one bullet on what their responsibilities are.
Sure, we can do that.
Thank you.
Again, from a process standpoint, the RFQ was issued in early September. We got 3 proposals. We met and made a selection on October 1st. Obviously, we didn't get to the briefing back on the 14th, as you stated, and it's on your agenda tonight for consideration with the intent that we've been working with the consultant on the scope of working contract, and that the COG would try and execute a contract around mid-November with the selected consultant team.
Mr. Winston?
My questions would just relate to timing, and I guess, Mr. Chair, how this could interplay with our comprehensive plan. I would imagine that, obviously, like you said, this is a regional plan, but as we sit kind of in the middle of it, and the infrastructure that would hopefully come out of this ultimately in the coming decades, we would have to prepare for that. So wondering how that, these two plans might interplay as they're created.
So that's something that we are mindful of. The different cities and towns within the county right now, outside of Charlotte, I would say Matthews is doing what it's called a mobility sustainability plan. Cornelius is working on a comprehensive plan, or about to. Davidson is about to wrap theirs up, and Huntersville is waiting for us to finish ours before they start theirs. And Pineville is at one level or the other in terms of their plan. So the essence of that is that different towns, not just even within Mecklenburg, but even outside, are looking at their comprehensive land use plan at this point in time. So that makes this a very important piece of that work. 51% of those who commute to Charlotte to work every day come from outside Mecklenburg County. I think they come from some of these MPOs. And so my sense, my thought is that as the MTC looks at this, and as Central Carolina Council of Government looks at this, they'll be mindful of the associated land use plan. We definitely will be as we walk through this, through our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan is not due for a draft to be done by this time next year. So we expect that at least within 6 months of this start of this study, there will be some initial outcome that will have some implication on the policies that will be coming to you towards the end of next year. So we definitely will be paying very good attention to this.
Can I follow up?
Yes.
And this council, and I imagine the next iteration of council, find it important to find ways to stay engaged and updated to the process around the several plans that we're into, including this. So we'd like to know, again, maybe the answer isn't going to be right now, how do we stay engaged? I know the mayor is on the MTC, but how does council stay engaged and involved with what is happening, what is going on, and how do we kind of continue, have an open dialogue throughout this whole process?
I think the commitment that I can make to you is that we will make this an item on TAP, future TAP meetings, as MTC and SECOG are also getting their respective presentations. We will make sure that we come here to present this to you. So I can say the same thing with the I-77 mobility study, which you're going to hear from later. I think a few months ago we brought that before you, before the consultant was selected. So we'll do the same thing with this one as well, so that we don't, because I totally hear you. It's important to know what's going on with this.
So, last follow-up.
Yeah.
So what would be the mechanism once we're bringing it to TAP for our feedback, council's feedback, to go back to the MTC, whether it be with this process or just in general with business?
It will have to be that when you make your comments here, I think staff will definitely be mindful of those. I will say that in addition to coming to TAP, we probably will make some periodic committee to presentation to council as well. It may not necessarily be the way we've been doing a comprehensive plan, but we definitely will be bringing that to you as we go through the process. And I'm sure that once they've laid out how the community engagement piece of this will go, we will have that information. We'll pass those on to you, so you're aware of where they're taking place.
Thank you.
I think the other thing, too, is that other council members probably got emails from Gastonia elected officials over the weekend, or in the last couple days, and they're really keen to understand what we're doing, where we are. They were I think they were worried that the Silver Line wouldn't happen, and they wanted us to know how important it is to them. So opportunities just for us all to participate with our council members over across the river might be great, too. So, speaking of, okay.
So I'll say that the agenda you have in front of you leading off this says that council will approve the contract tonight. That's not the case. This has been moved to November the 12th. So there's no action you need to take on this right now. But it will be an opportunity for John to share with you what we've heard from you, but essentially what we've been doing on this subject as well.
Oh, okay. You meant this has been moved, not what we just talked about.
Yes, the regional transit study is still on tonight's
Okay, all
or
right.
this afternoon's agenda for approval. No, that's $1 million, I think, about $2 million
$2 million.
for the previous one. Yeah.
Right.
that's
And that
just
is on the agenda
That's on the
tonight.
agenda tonight.
Right.
But this is now on the 12th of November agenda.
The Silver Line item has been moved to the 12th.
Okay, 12.
Is that
What is that?
Oh, because of Veterans Day, it's a Tuesday.
Yes.
Go ahead, John.
Good?
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Lewis, Executive Director of Charlotte Area Transit System. I just want to go through quickly where we are with the Silver Line. We've given this presentation to full council. We've had, over the last couple of weeks, individual meetings with council. I won't go, council members, so I won't go through each slide in that. I do want to highlight a couple of important critical points. And as Taiwo mentioned, the agenda item has been pulled from tonight's agenda and will be moved to the 12th. So we'll have continued opportunities to answer questions and provide information. So the purpose of this item is to allow CATS to move forward with design environmental process for not only the transit-oriented development and planning services contract for the Silver Line, but also design and engineering work for the Silver Line itself. CATS has programmed $50 million in its budget to advance this project. This contract will allow us to go all the way through to 65%, which is an important part of the federal process. And so why is this key right now? to move forward. Number one, to allow us to begin to develop the preliminary engineering design, start to go through the federal environmental process, but most importantly, it allows us to begin coordination with multiple NCDOT projects along the corridor. The corridor is outlined in purple here. As we continue to go through, the projects outlined in red are key NCDOT infrastructure projects that are in various levels of planning and design right now and over the next couple of years. And it is very important, vitally important, that we are in lockstep with NCDOT in the early design of these projects so that as they move towards implementation and construction, there will not be anything that will prevent us from moving forward with the Silver Line in the future. I'll just pick one, the new bridge over the Catawba River. The current bridge has been there for almost a little more than a century. This is a generational project, and we want to make sure as NCDOT is moving forward with design of that project that we make sure that there is the coordination necessary so that we are either designed into that project or nothing that they are doing would prevent us from moving forward with light rail over the river in the future. And the same opportunities exist for other projects.
So what's the timing on that project, John? And is the idea actually that it will be built so that it could hold light rail?
So several items we're working, Mayor Pro Tem, to pull together some information of all the projects, where they are in various levels of design with NCDOT. We know it's been documented that there's some challenges, funding challenges at the state level, and so some of these projects may be delayed to some extent or another. So we'll pull that information together. But in regard to the bridge as an example, it would be ideal for CATS that bridge is designed in such a way that we can add light rail to the span at some point in the future. But at the very least, we want to make sure that nothing is designed into the project that would prevent us from moving forward in the future. So we're at the coordination phase. Our staffs are working together to look at all available options, but it's that key coordination that will need to happen over the next couple of years for many of these projects.
So, and I know that, our neighbors on the other side of the river really want that to happen. So it sounds like our priorities are aligned, but how does that, whose bridge is that? Is it theirs or ours? So
It's the state's bridge.
So it's the state, so it's their funding, but we'd be paying for the design study?
So when the two studies are happening concurrently, this is an area of coordination. So I don't know that there's a need for shared funding in that regard. It's just shared information to make sure that, as an example, they don't design the bridge in such a way that would prevent us from moving forward in the future. Ideally, again, it would be great if they designed a bridge that would allow space for us to add light rail in the future, but those are the questions that we'll be working on over the next couple of
Okay, I thought that was a given, so thanks for clarifying that.
Sure.
Anyone else?
Yes,
I was
John?
just going to add, this particular project, the Catawba Bridge, the planning had started for that effort, so there has been a lot of involvement with CADS and with CARPO staff, and then with the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln staff on the other side, so we've all been in meetings, on the bridge project. Now, I think the project has been kind of put on hold, and we don't know what the new schedule would be, but most of the conversations that we've had have indicated that rather than be part of their span, we just want to make sure they locate, and then we'll probably build our own bridge on the north side of their bridge. So we haven't tied it into one large mutual construction project, but we are working with them to make sure that the alignment that we favor based on the work we've done and we continue to design, that they don't compete for the same space if you go across the river.
Okay.
Understood. So this next slide outlines the federal process for moving forward with large capital transit projects and new starts and core capacity process. We are the stage of the process that we want to begin is the pre-project development, and that is where we would intend to move forward. That generally will take you to about 30% design. This funding that is outlined in this will get us most of the way there, but most importantly, we want to move forward with 15% design. This project is staged so that it is task item oriented. We will move forward at first with about 15% design to continue the coordination efforts along there. Report back to council on an update, give you an update on the status of where we are before we move to another level of design. Now, what is key in this is pre-project development not only will allow us to coordinate those projects, but also begin to identify, help us put a more detailed cost estimate for the entire project. At the end of that pre-project development, before we enter into project development, which is a key stage from the federal process, the project development stage, the purple box next to the green box, what is key in that is that has a 2-year window. So once we enter into that stage, we must complete in 2 years and be ready to move forward with a procurement process for construction, design, final design, engineering, construction. And so moving through the green box would allow us to put a more detailed cost estimate, timeline, and then to be ready to answer the local funding issues surrounding moving this project forward.
So are you saying that we can't get more detail? I mean, because I think the reason we're delaying this vote till November is because council members have asked for more detail on what the possible cost structure would be, how we're going to pay for it, and an estimate as to what estimate as to what it would cost, estimate, and how it would be paid for.
Well, when you're looking at a project, this project is going to be somewhere probably between $3 and $4 billion. To get to a level of detail that would enable us to enter into a full funding grant agreement, we've got to do much more design work in this. What I have been discussing is really back of the napkin costs. When we look at the cost of the Blue Line extension, which we opened last year at $125 million a mile, and just straight line, how many miles of this quarter, we get to that $3 to $4 billion range. But there's no way that we can get better numbers without doing this level of design.
Understood, but how do we pay for the $3 to $4 billion? That's what council members have been asking. We know that Washington seems to be frozen right now in terms of infrastructure financing, but if we assume that the same model would apply, then what's our portion of that estimated $3 to $4 billion, and what does that mean in terms of how we pay for that? Is that a property tax? What does that translate to? So my understanding is that's what council members are asking for before we approve the $50 million.
Sure. I think this is one of those areas where, it's the chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
And we will have to determine, again, if you're looking at that $3 to $4 billion range and you look at how we funded the Blue Line extension at 50% federal, 25% state, 25% local. Now, those numbers can shift a few degrees either way. We're looking at, for the Silver Line only, probably around a local cost of $1 billion. There are many different ways that we can get to that, from financing, if you look at our current half-cent sales tax, that brings in about $120 million a year. And so there are ways that we can shift the chairs around the deck on that to come up with that local share in that $1 billion range.
But that we can talk about now. Let's just make the assumption it's $4 billion. But that we can talk about. Where would that $1 billion financing possibly come from? And that's what, is there a component of private-public partnerships? What is it? And that's what I understand. The council members that don't want to vote on this tonight want that level of discussion, just to say, what are the options that we
Sure.
have?
And I think what we are working towards is laying out what all the potential options could be.
Okay.
If we raise the sales tax, if it's property tax. Public-private partnerships help us on delivery aspects. It doesn't mean that it lowers the cost of the project.
Right.
Excuse me.
Could change the timing.
It doesn't change the availability of local funding. And so there are many ranges that we'll have to choose from. Some of that, which would recall some interaction with the General Assembly, if we're looking towards sales tax as an example. So there's a whole plethora of options in that regard, and I think that's some of the things that we can be working towards as we continue. But at the end, you know, trying to do that based on a guess doesn't give us a whole lot of faith in what those potential sources should be.
Mr. Winston?
Yeah, I think we, you know, as we continue to hear from Mr. Lewis and all staff members that come forward to this, that we will learn more as we go, and as is the case with projects like this. I really think the community needs to hear that we are committed as a council to building our public transportation infrastructure that is going to have to include lines like the Silver Line. You know, we've been building railroads and rail in America since 1837, and it's always been expensive, and we find ways to do that. I think the real cost to this is not doing it, and we know what those costs are. Not being able to have a city that is connected east to west, not being able to have residential areas that are connected to job centers, having people that are living in Charlotte but are disconnected from the growth that the city as a whole is experiencing, and that causes massive inequities. That causes, you know, all the things that we are trying to deal with. So I think I hope for my colleagues, you know, as I know we have to answer the questions and give as much information as we can, and you always want to have more information to give. But I think right now the community needs to hear, and what we need to do is be able to commit to this. We have all said in the past that this is a priority, and bridging these gaps that exist systemically over time because of the way we developed, that we're committed to changing this. And we need to do that here. We will find the means to pay for this. We know that everything is going to have to be on the table, from taxes, bonds, restructuring, whatever it may be. We just need to commit to this and push this forward as fast as possible, because as has been said over and over again, we can't rely on just building a line every decade, because we need to do this and then move on to the next thing as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm putting forth the impression that I don't support it. I'm putting forth the request that we have some accountability for what it is that we're trying to spend $50 million on. And I think it's fair to ask the question so that we can explain to our constituents, how are we going to pay for a $4 billion? I think it's going to be at least $4 billion by the time we really get to that point. And that's fine, but how do we pay for it? That's the conversation people would like to hear. Ms. Ajmira?
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. I agree with my colleague here, Mr. Winston, that we have to show commitment. I understand that, I think the point some council members have made about the numbers and how it's going to all work, but again, we are not even at that phase yet to really start discussing possible options. I think we gotta at least show the commitment, and I'm sure that just like we have done with Blue Line Extension and so many other lines, we will have to tap into various pool of funding sources, whether it's sales tax, property tax, or private and public partnership. But I think this is important that we show partnership, we show the commitment to this transportation, because if we are worried about just $50 million, then we might as well say we're not going to do the line, because it's going to take billions of dollars to do this. You know, this reminds me of our capital process. how we have changed in the budget committee, where we are putting in money upfront to figure out what it's going to take for us to figure out the cost for Cross Charlotte Trail, for an example, or any capital project. So this is the way, it's like an investment for us to figure out how much it's going to cost. Once we know the cost, we will figure out whether we go to public-private partnership, how much money we have to ask for the federal or the state and so on. This is the process that we have to invest in order to figure out the cost estimate. We have done that internally at a smaller scale for all our capital funding. Now this is just at a bigger scale to build out the light rail. So, I mean, I'm actually on board with this. I think we got to spend money to figure out what's going to cost us in the long run, so.
Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I think it's almost like we got two referendums coming up this election, one on the arts and one on this, because it makes some people are making it seems like, you know, whether or not this arts referendum passes or not, it bodes, you know, it impacts what decision we're going to be making for this project going forward. So I think we're actually sending mixed signals to the community in terms of, we've been talking about this for a long time. I mean, the blue line is good, but it's inadequate. I mean, it's good. It's good. Been good for the South End. It's good for University City area and points up to that. But I mean, it's just one line. So, you know, if we, I mean, like you said, I don't think we could go to the federal government with something on the back of an envelope saying this is what we think the estimates are. When we're competing for funds with other municipalities, other cities, other, you know, around the country, I mean, they're going to be having their numbers in a row, right? I mean, we're going to be coming in. So I don't understand what, I mean, why we,
exactly.
You know, I was prepared to be voting on this, but all of a sudden over the weekend, I get a call saying it's been moved. And
Well, I
it
don't
really
know why
aggravates
it's been moved,
me. I mean,
because I think since we had the conversation, we could have been presented with, here's the potential ways that this gets paid for. I think that could have happened between last week and this week's
well,
vote.
I think we've always elicited,
done,
talked about the potential ways it could be paid for. I mean,
It's hard
we
to
talked
tell.
about this. I mean, we're going to have to look at public-private partnerships, maybe increasing the transit tax or the sales tax. So we've already had a menu already of potential ways to pay for it. But, you know, when you throw out property tax increases of like 9 cents or something, that more or less, I think that inflames the public to the point that I don't know that it would enhance acceptance of this plan on a go-forward basis. So, you know, either we're going to do it or not. I mean, that's the thing. And so I guess I'm really confused at the direction we're going. I'm not so sure that, you know, I'm not all that confident now that, are we going to see another line other than the blue line, you know? So the way that the tenor of the discussion is going, I guess I'm doubtful on it.
Well, I support the 50 million. I just think, you know, I also support putting 50 million into our bus system. So, you know, this isn't in isolation. Our transit system is not in isolation. And we just don't have those conversations. I don't know how to explain it to the public on how we then also make our bus system somewhat efficient, because it's not right now. So that's all I'm asking is, you know, is it not worthy of a conversation as to how we're going to pay for things? I don't know. I support 50 million. Don't get me wrong. I support investing in the Silver Line design and engineering. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking how we're going to pay for a regional transportation system. Mr. Winston.
Well, I think explaining how to pay for it, this is one of the parts of that explanation, is that you have to study and determine what the costs are. You know, we can have an academic discussion for Civics 101 of how government projects can get funded and all the opportunities and options that we can look into, but I don't think this is an appropriate venue for that. I think we need to commit to the project, figure out what we're dealing with, and then create a plan to execute that. And I think that's what staff, I think that's what the region, that's what our constituents are looking for. How can we bridge these gaps, these literal equity gaps, You know, and this is transportation is one of those key factors that we've said over and over and over again. And now's the time to do it again. I was befuddled as why, you know, we took this off the agenda. This is time loss, and we will continue to have those conversations, both on an academic and a project-specific level, but we need to move forward on this.
Maybe I can speak to that a little bit. John's next slide actually has some breakdown in terms of 15%, 30%, and 65%. And he said, we're going to have a check-in with you prior to expending the entire 50 million. Once we get to that 15%, we'll have a check-in with you at that point. But as to why this was moved, I think Mayor Pro Tem referenced that, yes, we definitely wanted to move forward with this as well, because John will tell you that time is of essence. We need to move forward. But we also felt that the next week's vote will really help us to address how you deal with the sources of funding as well.
Yeah.
It's not going to change from federal, state, local, and all of that, but the type. So it's really uses and sources of funds. So November 12th gives us an opportunity to have more information for you when it comes to that. But nothing about the project and the way we're moving forward has changed, other than we're losing about a month from, which obviously in terms of design work can be a lot of time. But we hope that on November 12th, not only will you have the contract in front of you, but you also have the opportunity to see how this funding will look like. Again, what's happening on Tuesday, November 5th, will impact how we tell that story as well.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, you keep hearing this periodic noise. That's the construction going on.
That's the tax, taxpayer dollars at work out there. Constructing, capital investment going on right downstairs, you know?
It's not any train running, you know.
So, Mayor, Pro Tem, last week, I went to, they had the NCDOT or the Georgia Department of Transportation had a drop-in meeting about high-speed rail from, I guess, D.C. to Atlanta. And they had prices of between $2 and $15 billion that it's going to cost, and it's unfunded right now. So you got $2 to $15 billion, you got our billions. I mean, it's like, where's all these billions? I mean, how are we going to pay for it?
Thank you.
Is it who gets in line first and grabs the funds first?
So let's get in line.
I'd love to hear from Washington.
But you also have to think that the high-speed rail is about 2 states and multiple jurisdictions, actually 3 states, right?
Virginia.
And multiple jurisdictions,
Right.
and the funding and the breakdown will be very different.
But we got multiple counties too, right?
Yes, we do. And obviously, that's a more expensive deal than this one.
Yeah.
But again, on November 12th, at least as we brief you, we will have more information.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I hear very clearly what you're looking for. But I want to make sure everyone understands, we can lay out multiple options in terms of order of magnitude, but I get real nervous. We can move, so like moving checker pieces around the board, you know, a quarter cent, a half cent, a penny here, a penny there, an added fee here. Ultimately, until we know what that, final number we're looking for, I think that helps us establish what is the right mix. But to your point, we can lay out, lots of options for what if.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that's all that people really want to hear is what if. If you want to do that tonight, that's fine, but if the point is that you think it's material to wait until after the 5th, that makes sense too.
I just think it's dangerous to just continue to, you can put all the what ifs, but then you're dealing with hypotheticals in all the situations, and that that doesn't
Yeah,
create
exactly.
an environment of trust or real accountability, that just kind of muddies the waters ahead of time. You know, you have situations, like you said, that you have state-funded projects that are going on as well. So you don't, you know, you don't know in 2-3 years or
It's
5
premature.
years, it's very premature. And you run the risk of really confusing the total ecosystem that has to get behind this by just throwing out what ifs and causing fear or causing expectations that can't be met. Just, you know, because you.
I mean, to that point, we don't do this in isolation, and the state needs to know what we're thinking about, and other counties need to know that. So at some point, we got to have a full conversation about our full transit system statewide. I mean, I'm on a state board, that's what we're doing. How are we going to pay for transportation for the future? And it's a big question mark. The highway tax fund is broke. The state highway tax fund, I mean, that you know, for transportation, not transit.
Yeah, I just think it starts with commitment. Say, we are going to build this line. We are going to do this. And then you figure out how to pay for it. It starts with commitment. And if we don't have that commitment, then everything else is really just academic.
Okay. Maybe we want to move to the third item? So thank you. But in all seriousness, though, we do take your comments seriously, and we will be addressing them prior to you taking action on November 12th. So we do that. There was a reference to the high-speed rail. I think at some point we also will definitely make sure that you have information on that as well. So the next item is the I-77 mobility study, I-77 corridor mobility study, and that will be presented by Augustine. I don't know how many of you know that Metropolitan Planning Organization also resides within the planning department, and so we try as much as possible, even though it's multi-jurisdictional, as much as possible, we want to make sure that whatever is going on here, we present to you. This is a 68-mile, I believe, effort, and the consultant was selected just a couple months ago, who is working with us on this. Like the other two presentations that you just heard on the Silver Line and the Regional Transit Study, this is also a multi-jurisdictional effort going from South Carolina to North Carolina, or North Carolina to South Carolina. Anyhow, Augustine is a project manager, and he's going to kind of share that with you in terms of where we're going with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me. This is the first time that I attend this meeting, so this is a pleasure and an honor.
Welcome.
Again, my name is Agustin Rodriguez, and I'm the transportation manager, transportation and engineer manager for CRTPO CARPO in the planning department. And today, let's see, I'm going to go over the I-77 corridor study, as Taiwo mentioned. So I'm going to give you a quick, breakdown of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you an evolution of the interstate itself, the I-77, then talk about the background for this study, as well as the study purpose, taking us into the overview of this study and the updates, next steps, and open it for any questions. But at any time, just stop me and ask me any questions before we get to the end. So first things first, 1960. I'm going to take you back to the future. And I want to show you a little bit about the I-77. So in 1960, you can notice there was no interstate to Charlotte or to the Charlotte region. What else you see that is not in that map? Anybody?
Lake.
The lake. Yes.
Oh, okay. Wow.
The lake was not in the 60s. Then by, I believe, for what I read is 1968, that's when the first segments of the I-77 started to come about. And then by the 70s, this picture is hard to see, but we have a good pieces of the I-77, particular through the downtown area in Charlotte, and then towards the north section of the county, as well as Morrisville, in Statesville. By the 80s, we basically have an entire interstate through the Charlotte region. It's still missing several gaps, and I believe it was really by the mid-90s, Bill Cox with Huntersville, he told us at the kickoff meeting last month about he's been with Huntersville for several years, and he told us that was in the mid-90s, the last section that was open in the mid-90s. And then to the present, where we see the more familiar look of the Charlotte region area. So that was the introduction to the I-77 as a whole. Just for some of those that may be from out of state or out of town, as myself. Now I'm going to take you into a background of how this study came about. So in May of 2013, with MAMPO, the Mecklenburg Union County MPO, the prequel to currently CARPO, it was decided, the board decided unanimously to amend the long-range transportation plan to include a study for the I-77 corridor. And then, as the code shows, and one of the commitments or one of the conditions to that was to make a recommendation that in a strategic study of all travel corridors along the I-77 from Charlotte to Statesville begin as soon as possible. And then soon after that recommendation, during the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or MTP, it was also found and recommended to have this study. So it was consolidated. So in May of 2013, the first phase was we make this recommendation, and then during the 2040 MTP study, which is an MTP, the MTP is for the entire region, not just for Charlotte, but for basically all of the counties around Mecklenburg as well. It was decided to also include the I-77.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Mr. Phipps.
I would like the record to reflect that in May, I think I was on the MUMPO board at that time.
So
As
you
a
probably
He's in his
remember that.
twilight. He's reminiscing on all the times.
All the
and
times.
I think I was the planning department liaison or something like that.
Wonderful. Then now we jump into the study for purpose for this particular study. So throughout the years, there's been many studies. Currently, we have probably 5 or 10 studies in the state of North Carolina alone. I believe even 2 right now in this region, in the Charlotte region. But what's different about this one is that we are doing something that is essentially unique. There is only, I think, right now, 3 other studies of this magnitude that is being done or are currently undergoing throughout the United States. So this is not something that is done on a regular basis. What's different about it is that we're going to have a master plan document that is going to really capture everything that has been done in the past, everything that is being done right now, and we're going to look into the future to make recommendations and really bring up a vision of what is going to look and what we want to be the I-77 corridor. And I want to make clear something, is that this study is not going to just focus on the pavement on the actual interstate alone. Again, it's a corridor, so we're looking at all of the infrastructure, for better term, and I go into the next slide and I show the area that is more or less between 4 to 10 miles width from the interstate itself. Which, again, some of the studies done currently and in the past in many states and cities throughout the U.S., they really studies for the interstate alone. The next purpose for this study is to identify strategies to achieve the vision, which I mentioned a moment ago, through an ongoing collaborative community engagement process. So this is something that is going to be big for this study, is that we want to educate the public, we want to educate the elected officials as well as the professionals to know on, okay, this is the recommendations, what we're doing, and why we're doing this, and ultimately, this is the goal of this of vision for the next 20 or 40 years down the road for the I-77 area. And then also, and lastly, to prioritize a list of improvements along the study area, but particularly parallel networks and east-west connectors or connections for the upcoming MTP. So an overview of this project, which one of the things that we're doing as part of the public engagement is we're developing a branding. And we're going to be developing potentially a name other than just the I-77 corridor study, something that I'll go over more details shortly. But the limits of the study starts from the south area, from the southbound or south neighbors, from exit 77 in Rock Hill, and it moves up to exit 54, which is the next exit after I-40, up in Iredell County. So roughly 11 jurisdictions, or in total it covers 11 jurisdictions, 3 counties and 2 states. And several agencies are currently working or are part of this project, part of the team. We have 2 committees, the technical and the elected officials, or the advocacy committee, which I believe some of you are part of that, some people in this room, as a matter of fact. And then the emphasis, we have 6 emphases. Again, which make us different from many other studies throughout the United States. So the first one is the congestion management. We're going to be looking at connectivity within the network, investment funding in strategies, technology, multimodal recommendations, so bike path, and transit, rail, and last use coordination. So those are the 6 main tasking for this study. The status, in 2017 through 2018, so basically what we've done so far was there were meetings, or 2 major meetings with public officials, government agencies, leaders, and they met together. Basically, they approved this project. They talk about when can we start this. Let's start this as soon as possible. So the funding was pursued, and NCDOT granted $2 million to go forward with this. They also wanted us to know, okay, how much time it's going to take, and the commitment was done for 2 years to get everything done within 2 years. By the time it get approved and the contract gets on place. Then after that, I believe this happened a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago. The RFQ, or actually August, so last summer, the RFQ went out, and Atkins Engineering was selected. The City Council approved on October of last year the contract with them. Then we went into contract at the beginning of this year. The contract was executed, which takes us now into 2019. And for some reasons, myself, my position was vacant for a couple of months, some people in contracting. Then we have a gap working with for the contract, but finally it was executed in August 15th of this year, and we held the kickoff meeting in September the 13th with a great participation. We had over 40 people from, again, all of those jurisdictions that I mentioned in the state agencies, as well as our partners. Then right now, we're working on the consultant team is working on the branding, as well as we're coordinating the first meetings. The first meeting that we're going to have will be the stakeholder meeting in early December. So again, we don't have a time frame for that, other than we know we want to schedule that as soon as possible for first or second week of December. And then we're also working on data collection to review and put together all of the previous and current work that is being done in this corridor of this region. So next steps. Over the next 2 years, as I mentioned, we have a window of 2 years, and it started on September. So we have until September of 2021 to complete this project, to have a report back to council and to the community. And it's broken in 5 phases, 7 taskings. Some of these taskings are a reflect of those 6 goals that I mentioned a moment ago. And then the next meeting will be on November the 5th over here. Hopefully, and many of you have got the invitation. The meeting will be to go over the branding as well, the data collection evaluation. So we're collecting, I believe, as of last week, we have over 45 plus projects that we're gonna be evaluating. So we're gonna, at this meeting, we're gonna consolidate this data and move forward to see what else we need to include before proceeding forward.
And forgive us if we're not there at that meeting, because it's
Election day.
important. It's election day.
That is right, yes. The meeting is gonna be in the morning, so I believe that.
Mr. Phipps will be there. Mr. Phipps is going to be there, yeah.
And then again, we are working on actually 2 meetings, 2 stakeholder meetings. Because of the length of the project, we have decided that meetings with the community will be in other than just downtown Charlotte. So right now, we're looking at the airport area, Woodland, Tyvola area, and then another one is in either North Mecklenburg County or Morrisville area, to have 2 meetings the same week. And one of the consultants, which is specialized on public engagement, is working on a survey, online survey. Their recommendation is to go after or start the public engagement process sooner rather than later. And we will begin this process as probably in early January or even late December. If this time you have any questions, I'll be happy to take it.
Mr. Winston?
I'll, be a broken record, just, finding ways to continue to engage us in this process. Also, as it relates to the comprehensive 2040 plan, how do we think about what, this plan is going to tell us? One of the things I think this is an opportunity for us to do from a staff and city perspective. I attended one of the carpool retreat a couple months back, and one thing that stood out to me is that some of our neighbors to the north, particularly in Iredell County and the northern parts of Iredell County, don't really see how they benefit from some of the priorities that we have. For instance, I talked about the airport and that being a center of commerce. Well, their manufacturing up there and the agriculture doesn't really feel that because the trucking routes don't go that way. So perhaps this is a way, again, thinking about all the plans that are going on at the same time and hopefully coming together. How do we integrate the northern part of our city and making it more welcoming and more integrated with our neighbors to the north?
Anyone else?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you.
So if I may just, I don't know if you have anything to say to wrap up. I think that there are really 4 items that were presented to you this morning. 3 of them are more transit and transportation focused. One, of course, well, I'll say 2 of them be more linear than anything else, being the Silver Line and the mobility study, and the regional transit study is more comprehensive and goes beyond the corridor. That's one of them, of course. Comprehensive plan be more land use focused, but there's a relationship, and there are relationships between all of them.
Yeah.
And so we need you to stay engaged on all of this as much as possible in terms of making sure that we know your thoughts process about this stuff before they move forward. But we'll also make sure that at periodic points in this process, we will check in with you, kind of make these presentations as we're going through it. Most of the time, it will just be informational, but just to be able to get your thought process on how this is going. The timeline for all of these are all over the place, and that is very important to grasp. I really think one is geared towards design and ultimately construction, while the others are just really more planning efforts, study, but the timelines are just different, and can be very hard to figure out. So at some point, we will present to you what all these big items are and what the timelines are, so that way you're able to kind of see where. I cannot guarantee that we can synchronize some of these things, but we definitely will make sure that we pay attention to the different timelines, the critical points, when to do check-ins with you, and also the end game for each one of them. So that way, that will kind of help you, because for the other three that are more multi-jurisdictional than the comprehensive plan, each jurisdiction will probably be getting presentations from the project managers as well. That will be outside of your group. But we'll make sure that we keep you up to date and well informed as we go through the process as much as we
Appreciate
can.
that.
Yeah. Good.
Great.
Thank you.
And with that, we can wrap it up. Our next meeting will be on November 25th, right here in this room at 10:30. So thank you, everyone.
Sounds good.
That's the Thanksgiving week, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what?